Well, good morning, class. I'm sorry that I couldn't stay with you, but I have notoriously overbooked myself this morning. It is the grandest version of the Jer Show we have ever known. But hopefully we've gotten through some of the mainstays that I wanted to talk about concerning navigating grief today. The key things that I want you to walk away with again is remember our focus scriptures of 1 John 4 about fear and love and how do fear and love counter each other, work with each other. What's the dynamic there? And then remember the prophetic words of Jesus where he's talking about the fact that we have an enemy. We have an enemy that wants to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But Jesus has come to give us life to the full. How does that work with loss and with grieving? And Jesus himself experienced loss. The Father experienced loss. Jesus went through a grieving process in the Garden of Gethsemane. He did it on the Mount of Olives multiple times. And those are the things that are written down so that we can know that in his humanity, he felt what we felt, right? So little Hebrews 4 there. In contemplating those scriptures, we don't want to just have scripture for the sake of having scripture. I want you to use those two passages as instrumental and key parcels of wisdom to help you navigate grief. Now remember that, and we've already talked about it in the class today, that everybody grieves differently. You're going to get tired of hearing that. We get it. It's a concept. Everybody starts there, right? Then we talked about defining grief. Well, we've done that. Then I took you back to some things we did last year in the class with the 5 stages of grief with Kubler-Ross and her prolific work. And again, we've already covered that today. And that makes me want to, again, emphasize the phases model by Sanders: shock, awareness of loss, conservation, withdrawal, healing, renewal. Then you've got the task model by Warden. I just want you to remember that people make their living off of extrapolating out their own concept of how things work. They make a name for themselves. It's not that these models aren't helpful. They are, but they're They are simply models to help us get our mind wrapped around some suggested patterns for stability, for balance, for matriculating through loss, what grief should look like, what is healthy grief, what is unhealthy grief. How do you come alongside and coach somebody who is grieving? So these models help us go down that pathway. Dirty little secret: if you're going to be a coach, you're going to be a counselor, a shepherd, you got to have some substance. And one of the best ways to have the appearance that you do have substance in what you're saying or the advice that you're giving is to create a system or even a subset of principles that people can wrap their head around, that people can implement, and it gives them direction. And the biggest point is it gives them hope. And we're gonna finish here in a moment. So with that idea of hope. So I did hopefully share with you about me memorializing grief. You can see right here, this is my blessed EXL1, D'Angelico EXL1. I call her Angela. I name all my guitars. I'm weird that way. But there's a reason why I do that. And the reason is because every single one of my guitars came out of a significant moment in my life. And there was some sort of either remuneration, or there was a gift, or it came from a birthday, or it came from Christmas, or it came from just different aspects. And so the purchase of the guitar wasn't just for the sake of having one more guitar. I don't need any more guitars. What was that, Janine? Anyway, I don't need any more guitars, but for me, it's a way to connect to things that are important to me, whether joyful or whether serious. And I have gotten rid of some guitars because They represent too great of a burden for me. I chose at some point no longer to hold on to that burden. So this is one of the ways that I grieve, is I memorialize grief. I have a whole wall in my office that I call my trophy of sorrows, and there are many things that are on that wall that speak to ways that I grieve, or reasons I grieve. My dog is now licking the tripod. So much for studio quality. So all that to say, you may have a process whereby it's helpful for you in your grieving. We're going to work towards that and talk through it, and just the different models we've already mentioned today. We're going to hit it again next week. But in an effort for me to come up with my own model, I'm going to give you, you have the notes this morning, and I'm going to give you several areas that I've called if-then statements, right? And I kind of like this idea of cause and effect, that there's a reason we're grieving. There's a reason that there was loss. Now the question is, then what do we do with it, right? So if we suffer the loss of a relationship, then what do we do with it? If we suffer the loss of independence and independent living and independent movement, then what do we do with it? I think this if-then qualifying metric can be one of the most helpful models that we can look at. And I don't necessarily claim it for my own. I don't know where I got it. I don't know why it came to my mind, but I'm sure I heard it somewhere. Maybe I just rephrased it. So let's start with the first one. So if unbalanced, and we'll qualify what this means. If unbalanced, work towards balance without compromising the processing of sorrow. So much of the time we want to present ourselves as healthy, coping, and functional, and yet on the inside, or maybe even on the outside, we are not, because we're repressing things, we're ignoring things, we're denying things. We don't know what to do with some of our loss, right? So one of the best things I think we can do is measure ourselves, but not just us. We should have a friend or a spiritual mentor measure, and start with this idea of, even though we have grief, even though we have loss, has it stripped every part of normalcy away from us? It might for a period of time, but remember, the grieving process is a process. And so at what point should you start measuring? I think by involving some people and asking the tough question of individuals that you can trust, I think that there is an argument to be made that those individuals, when asked, should be able to indicate to you if you're unbalanced. And unbalanced would mean that I'm not functioning. I'm not getting out of bed. My hygiene doesn't matter to me anymore. I've isolated away from my relationships for too long. I am no longer seeking God. I don't even know what to do with God at this point. I've kind of given up on things that were important to me. Okay, so we're going to have you discuss this. And because I have to do the video all at once, I'm going to go through all of these, and then you're going to go back and discuss. So here I want you to discuss what unbalanced looks like. Then you want to work towards balance without compromising the processing of sorrow. So much of the time people just tell themselves that they've got to get back to normal, right? They've got to get in rhythm. They've got to, and they never grieve properly. I've got 3 scriptures here that I want you to look at. Romans 9, 1 through 3. And by the way, these are interesting scriptures, and so you're going to have to read the context, and you need to discuss, what do you think Pastor was getting at by looking at this or suggesting these passages? So Romans 9, 1 through 3, 2 Corinthians 6, 7 through 10, and Philippians 4, 4 through 7. You can go into 8 with Philippians if you want, but I'd like you just to stick with 4 through 7. So number 2, if stagnant, then seek forward movement when helpful to do so. Well, what does stagnant mean? So you guys need to define what stagnant means. And this is somewhat related to the first diagnosis, attitudes, your patterns of behavior, those aspects of how are you living? What are your choices? What does every day look like? And so if it's stagnant, this speaks to motivation, right? A big part of moving through in a proper time period on motivate or on grief has to do with motivation. So stagnation can kill your grieving process because you don't know where to go with it. You don't know what to do with it. You don't know what the next steps are. And so seek forward movement when helpful to do so. I list Ecclesiastes 3 here, and so you can use that as a reference verse. By the way, I do not presume to believe that I know the only scripture that would apply. So if you see or think of the Spirit brings to mind some other scripture here, please feel free. Just know I'll be following up to see if you're heretical or not. Water break. So if isolated, then establish reminders or coaches that will help you. Isolation, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you stopped your bowling league. It doesn't mean that you took a time out from your Wednesday appointment of coffee with a good friend. It doesn't mean that. It means that you're cutting off everything. And it means that you're even isolating yourself physically from places that are the norms and that are helpful for you, even if it's uncomfortable a little bit. Approvable for processing depression, processing anxiety, and probably processing grief or dealing with loss, right, is to stay physically active. There is so much that goes on within us physiologically with grief. And neuroscience is fascinating on this with neuroimaging, neurobiology, and how the brain and cellular structure and the hippocampus and the imlugata, the Bacata, the Burt Bacharach, all of that factors in physiologically. And so if a lot of that is overtaking you, a lot like David's Psalms, right? And we'll get to that. I have listed 2 Kings 5, 10 through 14. This is the story of Naaman. I want you to think about and have some discussion or discourse about the servant girl recommending, because when you had leprosy, you would isolate, right? And just the processes of what had to happen for Naaman to be healed and to move forward, right? Because there was definitely a sense of him isolating, but the most unsuspecting person stepped up and didn't allow him to do that. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's not good, right? Then go back and think about Job's friends. It's not that he should have isolated. It's that they worked too hard. They overstepped. They were feeling themselves a little bit, and they started speaking without thinking. So that's the third one. The fourth is, if quiet, this is going to sound weird, but if quiet, then pray. Capitalize on the quiet. But if we're left to our minds, we're left to sorrow and we're left to grief, and we're quiet about it, oh my goodness, this is a way that Satan can truly get into our thinking and into our mind and cause so much havoc and chaos that's unnecessary. And that's a key word. It's a key word. I want you to think, I did that to wake you guys up. I want you to think about this idea of that which is unnecessary versus what is necessary, and use that as part of our metric or our filter when we're evaluating things. So if quiet, here it is, pray. So don't let your mind just sit stagnant. Uh, don't let your mind just sit on the sorrow. Pray. It's what Jesus did. So follow in his mastery, follow in his focus and his choices. Jonah did it, right? I mean, you can't get any more isolated than inside of a whale. So, but the narrative shows that he prayed, right? So pray your heart more than your mind. I don't often see myself saying this, but this is where, I mentioned neuroscience before. They've actually been able to measure tears. And every set of motivation to cause tears, for instance, if you're out in a windstorm and your eyes start reacting, or you're staring straight at the sun and your eyes got too dry, God has magnificently wired the body to create tears to saturate the eye so that it doesn't get damaged. Tears of joy and tears of sorrow, each one of those has a different genetic diagram. Isn't that amazing? And so the physiology that happens because of the emotive, and so there are things that neuroscience and neurobiology have been able to measure that shows what the body does in a reaction to sorrow or to loss. And there is a healthy process to crying when we're experiencing great sorrow. So I just really want to make sure that you understand there is a value in that prayer, and sometimes our mind does not allow our heart to speak. That's what I'm getting at. So maybe discuss that a little bit and look at Psalm 139. Don't go through the entire psalm, but maybe the first half of the psalm is good. Next, if lost, then seek godly wisdom. So much of the time when we are going through loss, we just don't know what the next step looks like. We've lost hope. We don't understand, or can we imagine what the future looks like without that loss? And sometimes time helps us adjust to that, but that takes moment upon moment upon moment of experiencing more of that thing being gone out of our life rather than being present in our life or familiar in our life. And so the heart, the soul, the mind adjusts accordingly. When you are lost in those moments, seek godly wisdom. It doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers right away. It doesn't mean that you can't live in that sense of feeling a little bit lost. Remember, Ecclesiastes 3, there's a time for everything, right? By the way, that was one of our previous verses. I don't think I mentioned it. But 1 Corinthians 2, 12 through 14, and James 1 through 5, seek godly wisdom. And that comes through the scripture. It comes through different books that have been created for the sake of speaking to these things specifically. And we'll put together some reference works that you can study later. Next, if discouraged, then pursue hope. Well, that seems pretty simple, Pastor. Wow, I thought this was going to be like revolutionary stuff, cutting edge stuff. You know what? Here's what's amazing. Most people who are discouraged don't seek hope. They get sucked into it, right? Psalm 40, that the Lord takes us from that miry clay and sets us on the rock, gives us a new name, puts a new song in our heart. And the implications of Psalm 40 is that we can't do it on our own. We need the Spirit to minister to our heart. We need to hold on and value those things that out of Scripture are principled and helpful. So look at Romans 5, 1 through 5, great passage on hope and the importance of hope. This is a great measuring rod of how to deal with loss and grief. Lastly, and by the way, when I say lastly, you guys can come up with your own. These were just several that I wanted to put out and propose as kind of a matrix on how to examine all the different forms of loss that we're gonna cover during the next few weeks. If overwhelmed, integrate simple and singular moments of joy that don't threaten your history with the loss. So I remember times in my life where I had loss, and there was a part of me that didn't want to go out, didn't want to go to a ball game, didn't want to go surfing with my friends, didn't want to do things that I knew would be fun, right? I didn't want to do that because I was worried. I was actually worried that I would stop grieving, that I would lose my sense of desire for that thing, that person, that moment to be rekindled. It felt like I was moving on way too fast. But I think there's an aspect to where you've got to have people, you've got to seek the Lord, you've got to seek the Spirit, and ask yourself, at what point, because we see it with Jesus, we'll see it here in Luke 22 when you read it, that even Jesus looked at the sorrow that was in front of him, and he sat down to have a meal with his disciples that he said himself he was very much looking forward to. I don't know that I would have wanted to do that, but Jesus sets that example. So I'm out. I'm going to turn this over to you guys, and either Brad or Christina will walk you through this. And so talk through the verses, talk through the if-then statements, see if you're buying into it, and maybe see if there's one that you would create as well. All right, I'll see you next week. God bless.
Bye-bye.